Days Gone may not have been the hyper-polished blockbuster release Sony's first-party studios usually put out, like The Last of Us, but viewed in isolation, there was a lot to love about the game. It was a classic diamond in the rough, and as is the case with any game with that description, developers Bend Studio have a great opportunity to make significant improvements with a sequel. A Days Gone 2 has not yet been announced, but it seems highly unlikely that it won't happen, not only given how much Sony likes to cultivate franchises, but also how well the first game did. And when Days Gone 2 inevitably comes, with a few improvements, it can properly realize its predecessor's incredible potential. In this feature, we'll talk about 15 improvements we want to see in a sequel to Days Gone. Improvements to parts that just did not work, some to the bits that did work pretty well but still have room for improvements, and others somewhere in between those two. So without further ado, let's get started. More in-depth plot lines about the infected. Days Gone did a surprisingly good job of making its not zombies, they're totally zombies, legitimately interesting from a narrative perspective, with plenty of engaging lore and backstories, and that's something that we want to see the sequel delve into a bit more. Having the story focus on the infected and slightly less on the conflicts between the survivors would not only set it apart from the first game, it would also provide a new perspective on the world, and more information about the Freakers isn't something any Days Gone fan would say no to. For instance, a greater focus on the lingering humanity of the undead, or lack thereof, and the moral quandaries that could lead to is something that would make for great narrative material. Deeper look into Deacon's past. Days Gone also surprised us with how good Deacon was as a protagonist. Contrary to his admittedly generic appearance, Deacon was actually an engaging, relatable character with a lot of depth, and a lot of that was because of how willing Days Gone was to give us looks into his past. So our simple desire for Days Gone 2 in this area is, well, more of the same. Keep digging into Deacon and his character, his past and his backstory, and in turn do the same for Sarah as well. Unravel stuff in their backstories that we don't already know about, and make us care for these characters even more. Better bike combat. Deacon's bike was a major part of Days Gone, but there are still some core aspects of that part of the game that needs to be improved. Exhibit A, bike combat, which was quite limited in the game. What we want for Days Gone 2 is to integrate the bike into combat with proper, dedicated mechanics with actual depth. In turn, ideally, it will also have scenarios and encounters that are designed around using those mechanics properly, rather than them just being in the game like an unnecessary addition. Looking back while riding. This might seem like an oddly specific thing to point out, but if you've played a significant chunk of Days Gone, or even not that significant, chances are you'll relate with this. Being able to look behind you with the press of a button while you're riding a vehicle is a pretty basic feature in any game, so it's already a little baffling that Days Gone did not have that. What makes it even more baffling is that looking back while riding your bike was something you had to do a lot in this game, especially if you were using your vehicle to make an escape from oncoming enemies or freaker hordes. Having to manually turn the camera 180 degrees with the right stick in such hectic situations felt awkward and unwieldy, and hopefully this kink will be ironed out in the sequel. Less repetitive mission design. An issue open-world games are often bogged down by is repetitive mission design, and that's true for Days Gone as well. In fact, that was one of the game's biggest issues. Sure, the side missions and optional activities offset that to some extent, but there's no getting around the fact that the main missions were often structured very similarly, and the fact that the game was so long and there were just so many of those missions did not help. Asking for better mission design with greater variety is a classic case of easier said than done, but it's something that Days Gone definitely needs. More technical polish. Speaking of some of Days Gone's biggest issues, its lack of technical polish was something else that a lot of people picked up on, to say the least. Sure, it wasn't Assassin's Creed Unity at launch levels of bad, not even close, but Days Gone was by no means a polished game, which is surprising because that's what we've come to expect from Sony's first-party games, and that's what we'll be expecting from Days Gone 2 as well, but more so because we're hoping it'll be an improvement over its predecessor. Better animations. This falls under the more technical polish category. In fact, it makes up for the lion's share of the category, because jerky, choppy animations were abundant in Days Gone, and the most obvious evidence of its lack of polish. And nowhere were those animations more apparent than in the enemies that you ran into in the open world, especially the Freakers. Given how large Days Gone was, it goes without saying that expecting its animations to be as buttery smooth and spotless would be unreasonable. But Horizon Zero Dawn, another Sony open world game, had brilliant animations, so it's not like it's impossible to get that level in games of this scale. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement in Days Gone 2 as far as animations are concerned, and we're hoping Sony Bend will be cognizant of that fact. Smoother cutscene to gameplay transitions. Again, this is an oddly specific thing to point out, but it was a relatively minor but reoccurring issue with Days Gone. Cutscene to gameplay transitions is something video games as a whole have nearly mastered by now, and seamless transitions from one into the other is something we see a whole lot of. In Days Gone's case, things just felt choppy. As minor as it sounds, it does contribute significantly to storytelling, so here's hoping cutscene to gameplay transitions in the sequel are more seamless. More tactical Freaker Horde encounters. Freaker hordes and encounters against them were by far one of the best parts of Days Gone, and there shouldn't be any doubt in anyone's mind that the sequel will capitalize on those strengths, ideally with even more improvements. And what might those improvements be? Well, more than anything else, we want those horde encounters to become even more tactical. Give players more options with which to take on hordes, more traps, more environmental elements, more ways to use your bike and weapons, perhaps even throw stealth in there, and make them all equally viable options. Allow players to really mix and match and take on hordes in constantly unique and interesting ways. Improved AI. As opposed to the Freaker hordes, when players were taking on smaller groups of human enemies or even smaller groups of Freakers, things were much less exciting, mostly because of how inconsistent the AI was. Especially during stealth, enemies could be quite dumb, so better AI should ideally be a priority for Sony Bend in Days Gone 2. Personal base. Owing to its post-apocalypse setting, Days Gone is perfectly suited for base building and customization mechanics, and that's something we're hoping for in Days Gone 2. Having a central hub location to call your home, gradually building it up, and having that progression bleed into the larger structure of the game is something that would work very well in such a setting. Rescuing survivors out in the open world through various activities and having them become residents of that base would fit perfectly within Days Gone's larger gameplay structure, and even make it more engaging. Improved customization and crafting. Days Gone had customization and progression mechanics, of course, and they were perfectly serviceable. But with a sequel, Sony Bend can think about those mechanics and how they're integrated into the game more deeply. Having more interesting abilities to unlock and a larger, more diverse skill tree that offers greater freedom for player choice should be a must. On the crafting side of things, being able to craft a greater variety of weapons and mods is something that we can assume will definitely be the case. But something else that we would like to see is being able to craft things for your central base, which we spoke of earlier, or craft different kinds of consumables that will grant unique buffs and debuffs, which could also lean more heavily into the scavenging side of things. Deeper cosmetic customization. Cosmetic customization should, of course, play second fiddle to more mechanical customization, but we're still hoping that this is an area where Days Gone 2 will expand its horizons. And not just in terms of Deacon's bike, but also Deacon himself. Changing his outfits and altering aspects of his physical appearance is by no means something that would be essential, but it would be a nice bonus. More emergent gameplay. One of Days Gone's biggest strengths was its emergent gameplay, with the game's many systems working in conjunction with each other to create a world far more reactive and with much greater mechanical depth than we're used to seeing in Sony games. This is an area where a sequel should look to take things even further. Maybe add more dynamic weather mechanics, for instance blizzards or snowfall, with colder weather slowing down freakers, or storms that make stealth easier. More survival mechanics. Days Gone toyed with having survival mechanics with its emphasis on scavenging and crafting, but we're hoping those mechanics are given greater depth in Days Gone 2. Maybe make conservation of ammo even more important. Maybe make players have to contend with things such as climate or hunger. This should go without saying, but something like this would make perfect sense within the context of its setting. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.